Hi, and welcome to Transform Today, a place that we can have some open and honest conversation. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. So why don't we get down to it? So I hope you've been doing okay these days. It's been some strange times here in Canada for sure, and in my part of Alberta here, it's no different than probably everywhere else. Um, it's good to see that Alberta is tracking in the right direction, and we hope that continues. And people are starting to engage more out and about, of course, carefully, I hope. And we just look forward to a continuing improvement in this whole situation we're facing right now. But I've just been thinking about the last few videos I've prepared for this series, Transform Today, and it seems I've always started off with sharing something about myself or some interests I have, and today I'm gonna do the same thing, and I'm gonna reach back in my life a little bit, back to the 1980s. You know, some of you who might be listening to this were not even born in the 1980s. That just makes me really old. But nonetheless, I just wanted to show you this piece of cutlery. Looks pretty ragged, I think, maybe even from view. I'll get a little closer there. You can see some staining. Well, this was in my toolbox. It's been in my toolbox for years, in various places in my toolbox, but I always find it in there from time to time. And long story short, I was putting together a new barbecue this past week, and I found this. And I thought this would be a good story to tell you about something in my life, but certainly about who gave me this knife. Now, you just look at it, it's just a piece of cutlery, it's a wooden handle, it's missing a piece here, it's got some design here. But what's really interesting, at least what you might find interesting, is this old dried up piece of masking tape on this side. And it says Rome 1944. Now, the person that gave me this was actually in Rome in 1944. And if anybody knows anything about history, Rome in 1944 was during World War II. And the person that gave me this, his name was Robert Hall. And Robert Hall he's since deceased, was my oldest two daughters' great-grandfather. And he was affectionately known as Papa to pretty well everyone in the family. That's what I called him eventually, and that's what he insisted on. And the neat thing about Robert Hall is his life. It's just an interesting life, and we had a really good friendship. And every time I would visit him, whether it was with family or even sometimes I would go visit him on my own, he always used to tell me stories about his life. Sometimes he would repeat the stories, but I always was interested in hearing what Robert Hall had to say about his life. He had such an interesting life. Now, Robert Hall, just so you know, was born a long time ago. As a matter of fact, one of the things that he shared, and I've actually seen some pictures of him at the RCMP Depot Museum years ago when I was there. He joined the RCMP in 1922. And just to give you some perspective, 1922 was 98 years ago. So he joined the RCMP in 1922. And then to fast track a little bit up to September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, well then Britain and France declared war against Nazi Germany. And when Britain declared war against Germany, Canada declared war because we're part of the Commonwealth. And Robert Hall, Papa, joined up in 1939, and he didn't come back until the war ended in 1945. That's how long he was gone. And he, being RCMP, joined naturally the Provo Corps. And what that means is simply the military police. He was in the Army, and he was basically the police. And found himself going through into Italy during the war, and here he found this. Now he told me a story about this, but what's interesting is that he always had stories. And I've got other things in my toolbox. He would share some of his tools. He would just give me a tool from time to time, whether it's just a simple screwdriver to a wrench or something like that. He just wanted to give me something from his toolbox. He says, I'll never use them again or something like that. But this is really an interesting knife. Robert Hall, or Papa is what I called him, was wounded during World War II. Came back from the war and resumed some duties, I'm not sure, with the RCMP, and ended up living in Victoria. And this is where I met him, in Victoria on Vancouver Island. And so it was just a great and interesting life that I learned about this man and about the story of this knife. What's interesting is 2019, I joined a number of my fellow fellow members of the regiment and friends and family, and we did a battlefield tour of the Italian campaign that the Loyal Edmonton Regiment was involved in during the war. So it'd be interesting to know how that was all connected with Rome 1944 and Robert Hall. But I just thought I'd share that with you. The other thing I just wanted to share too is, especially if you look at the news and you're cruising social media, there's a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety in our culture. What I found interesting about the Western society, and what I mean by Western is just in a general principle how we view the world in the West versus the East. The way people process things, the way they communicate, the way they live their lives, the way they do their, whatever they do, their work, their faith, is processed through a certain Western mindset. One of the things that's really obvious to me, at least, and it may be to you as well, is how much society in general avoids talking about death. And now, there's a lot of different reasons for that, I imagine. I know some of the things that I think the reasons for this, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I want to talk about, because of this avoidance of death, and now we have coronavirus where, death is staring a lot of people literally in the face. Many have died from it. And just a point on that too, people are still dying from everything else. So one of the things that's really something important, I think, in my life is to come to terms with this and understand that, well, the virus is not going anywhere. And we have to live our lives and we have to face it. And we have to make some decisions about that. But that's another note. But just the avoidance of death. Yet, really, we have a culture of death. I just think of the way older people are treated. And we've seen this with all the news in Quebec with the seniors' homes. And the terrible conditions that we hear about that are happening there. My friends, that's not a surprise to me. I've been ministering in those environments, and thankfully the places I've been are really, really doing a good job. But again, there's this whole idea of just, this mindset of we don't want to face death, and old people are getting closer to death, so we put them away in these homes and we avoid them. And a lot of people that were in uproar and a rage over the conditions, and rightly so, they should be, probably never spent one single day going and doing maybe a volunteer work there when they were allowed to. They probably never even went there, many of them. They just kind of just speak out of, and it's an honest rate, I get it. You should be upset. We don't have to be involved to be upset. But sometimes it just really ticks me off that people just don't get it, They close their eyes to all these things. They try and avoid this thing that's going to happen in their lives one day. There's 2 dates, folks, and I don't want to sound more, but there's 2 dates. There's 2 dates in our lives. There's our birth date, that's called B-Day, BD. Then there's D-Day, our death date. And not to end on a negative note, but to just end on a dose of reality. And not saying that we should chase after it. It will come in its own time. If you're a person of faith, I'm a Christian, I know that God has counted my days. And there's another person that talked about that in the Bible, and I just want to read some of that. This is David, King David, who was the king of Israel many, 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 many centuries ago. And he wrote this in his in this psalm that he wrote, Psalm number 39. He said, "Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Everyone is but a breath, even those who seem secure. Surely everyone goes around like a mere phantom. In vain they rush about, heaping up wealth, without knowing whose it will finally be. And that's interesting, isn't it? We avoid it, and all of a sudden it's upon you. Especially as you get older. I'm getting older. My body's not working as it used to when it was young, and I realize that. And maybe we need to realize that in order to live life, we have to acknowledge that we will die one day. In order to live a real life, we need to acknowledge that one day the curtain's going to close on our lives. And I don't know about you, but I do have a question. Are you ready for that? Now you don't have to be unhealthy about it. We have to face it. We have to deal with it. And in the culture that we live in, they're not doing a very good job, to be honest with you. As a pastor, as a part-time military chaplain, this has been my experience over many years. Even in my own life, before I decided that I would surrender my life to God, and who is the author and perfecter of my life. I believe that with all my heart and soul. And every day I count a blessing, even in these times, to be alive and to be able to be engaging in life, not perfectly, screwing it up sometimes, but just acknowledging what David says here, and to be honest with God and saying, show me, Lord, my life's ends, and help me to number my days and not to waste my time and silly things, and just really be engaged, to be someone that cares about other people, someone that wants to be part of the solution in many different places. And I just thank you for listening to me, and I just want to conclude with what David said in his psalm when he made those comments about the brevity of life. He said, now, Lord, what do I look for? And then he said simply, my hope is in you. Well, thank you very much. I hope you have a fantastic day. If you're willing and want to share something about your life, maybe about a person that made an impact in your life like Papa did in my life, and I just really appreciate your time, and I don't take it for granted, and I thank you so much, and just have yourself a fantastic day. Shalom.